were there, the illegal mine office, he ensured 150,000 people. What Biden has done, that he has secured that these.
Red letter day, I would say, and literally the city and the town would also be painted red. Only justified that you are also wearing the shade of red here. So thank you so much for the spirit. Help us understand how are things going to transpire from here, first of all, and secondly, what changes from this morning onwards?
Oh, namaste. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. By the way, red is a beautiful color. It is also a color of love. It's also, obviously, at the same time, it's also a color of vengeance. But I'll take it to the positive side at this point of time. As you know, President Trump has very clearly given massive directives of what he's going to do in terms of the executive orders that he is going to pass on the first day itself, sheer number of it, of course. But on the same time, the focus initially is going to be national security, border security, inflation issues that has actually heavily burdened our own country and the people, the regular, ordinary people who are actually who are having tremendous trouble for buying breads and groceries and milk and eggs, and gas prices were going through the roofs, and inflation was actually hurting us because even rent prices went up, and the energy prices that we have seen within the last few years, they continuously increased, and there's no we saw no signs of relief at all. So I'm sure that his executive orders initially is going to be helping in terms of bringing down the cost. He has spoken about putting 25% Canada on execution agenda that has been unleashed at this point of time. I think all in all, overall, in terms of economic strength and the internal security, the economic the relief that we have to go through in this country is going to be something that we're going to see. On top of it, the woke agenda that we have seen in the last 4 years, transitions, as well as hormonal intake that was happening without the knowledge of the parental consent. It was actually dangerous for a country or any community that the parents actually didn't have a say. The entire ecosystem, from the psychiatrists to the teachers to the government entities, they were all working together, but they were all trying to keep the parents in dark. So to me, it was something that I didn't expect, that kind of things in America, when we actually promote democracy in the entire world, and suddenly we were witnessing that horrific kind of undermining of democracy within our own country. So I'm sure in the first 100 days, we're going to see those taken into effect. That is going to give us massive relief. In terms of war, and in his first term, there were no new wars, but the ones that were going on, it was continuing, and discussions were happening in terms of whether how to wind it out. So, but when it comes to war, it's impossible to say that the warmongering, the military machines that America traditionally had is going to be completely gone. It's not. The reason I say it is because in the Middle East, we're going to see Iran actually going to play a massive role in terms of destabilization. And then when it comes to China, we are already hearing about Taiwan. And so overall speaking, the conversation with Putin might be a little positive at the same time. But what I have seen over the last phase of Trump campaign was quite positive to me, because the folks that were trying to his confidants and the closest folks that were talking about, they understood the situation in terms of Russia and the NATO. The NATO's expansion was illegal to me on the basis that they actually didn't keep their own word. And when Soviet Union was dismantled, NATO should have been dismantled as well, but that didn't happen. So when we talk about China is expansionist, at the same time US could be looked at it the same way as well.
Right,
So
absolutely.
I think the understanding was there. The sentiment was make some decision in terms of how about the Panama Canal
Right,
and
right.
also the Green Deal. That actually raises is quite pumped up in terms of that kind of takeover and expansion is idea.
Right.
I, as an Indian American moving to directory or so,
He can,
as an Indian American moving to directory or so,
he can do is very
Bloomberg has reported taking oath, which will give him multiple. He's aiming to is going to be. See, of course, can USA in a aiming to is going to be. See, of course, can USA in a very
as you
USA in a very
as you can constitute on all dimensions, making America great against the world by the so-called globalists like George Soros and company, and the so-called deep state.
Yeah.
Whereas Trump is completely shifted from the other side. Now, what does it exactly mean on the ground? Now, you mentioned about energy. I think that's probably the first target because, Trump is not necessarily a fond of renewables like, wind energy or solar, etc. I mean, he's still into the hydrocarbon age.
Yeah.
And I think that's where his base as well belongs. So you're going to have a big lease of life for companies like Chevron and Exxon, etc.
Mhm.
And so he's, you remember in the first term, it was drill, drill, drill. I mean, so that's something which is going to be revived. And as you mentioned, that's probably going to be the first kind of steps. And second thing is that's also going to be the competition to Russia, for example, because it's Russian gas and oil which is being pumped. And Trump has been on record that American exports have also to expand. So oil and gas is back in a big way, which is part of his scheme of things.
So businesses are going to work very differently. The market is going to change if all that happens. Because, of course, even India is considering that we should have nuclear energy. We want to expand in that field. They have researches going on. But if we want to go back to it, and if this is going to be core of US businesses, then things would be different because we know that even Musk is trying to get electric vehicle, the best of the electric vehicles.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a mix of the two. You're not going to have only one form of energy, but it is not that kind of a fanatical opposition to hydrocarbons. I mean, I think ultimately you're going to have a mix of both kinds of energy, the new energy as well as the traditional energy, which I think can be a good balance. You mentioned about Musk electric vehicles. This is new energy, battery-driven car. I think both will coexist. But you're not necessarily into the theory of climate change and what downstream effects it has. But I think as a person who is into the energy business, you're going to have both kinds of energy, the mix. Then you also mentioned about Greenland and Panama Canal. I think that's where the competition with China comes in, because Greenland sits on the new route, which is called the Arctic route. Which is from the Arctic Circle. If you move towards the east, you head towards Alaska, and if you move west, you head towards Europe. And Greenland comes right in the middle of it. Now, the Chinese and the Russians are both in the Arctic Council, are very strong members. And frankly, companies like Costco. I've been in China. I mean, I've reported from China for a few years. I mean, that's a huge, massive company which has already moved into the Arctic route. So I think there's a China angle which is big time over there, as is the case with the Panama Canal.
Right, and
Because
there is oil too in Greenland.
And Panama Canal is also controlled by a Hong Kong-based company. So I think that's where the Chinese dynamic is coming in. I mean, the wellsprings of what Trump is saying. I don't think you're going to send your forces out there, but you flagged certain points to the Chinese. That's a communication specifically aimed at the Chinese and to the rest of the world, that where US core interests lie. I mean,
Right.
Trump is going to be assertive about it. So I think there's a lot of messaging which is going on. I very much doubt you'll need military force to enforce it. But yeah, you put these countries on notice and under pressure, including Canada, the so-called 51st state of the
Stay with
United
us,
States.
Mr. Oneida. Stay with us. Pradeep Kapoor, former diplomat and visitor.
Trump. So that again is a personal element which.
Right, absolutely. Stay with us. Pradeep Kapoor ji is there with us. Welcome to Oneindia, Mr. Kapoor. obviously, there are so many international aspects to a new president assuming office in United States. Coming back home, if we take a closer look at Make America Great Again or America First policies, Mr. Kapoor, how do you see it impacting India's interests? Does this aid or help the Indian cause, or is it a cause of worry for India?
Thank you very much. What I would, like to talk about here is that the breaking US forces were, overlapping with the breaking India forces to a very great extent. A lot of the Hindus vote for Trump in much larger numbers. Otherwise, Hindus are traditionally people who vote for Democrats. I think this was the first election since the last so many decades that Hindus voted for Trump and Republicans. So today, what do you have? You have the Senate, which is controlled by the Republicans. You have the Congress, which is controlled by the Republicans. You have the White House, which is controlled by the Republicans. You have the judiciary, which is controlled by the Republicans. The media, the mainstream media was another element, which was, not really talking favorably about Trump at all and propagating the other narrative. Now they are coming to Trump on bended knees practically. All the influence which had been exerted by China earlier, a lot of that is dissipating. The social media is also coming towards Trump in a big way. We have seen about how Elon Musk took over Twitter, and Twitter, which was totally against Trump in the earlier tenure, is now completely turned around. So is Meta. So there has been a lot of shifts over the last few years. Now these portend to a very great extent very positively for India, because Trump and India relations have been good, very good. There have been certain minor irritants because for him, if I have to look at his personality, look at his psychology, look at the way he thinks or works, for him it is primarily America, America, America. Anything which falls into that framework is good, and India falls into that framework very well, because for America to cannot on its own is very, very difficult, because China is nipping on the heels of America, and America knows that very well. All the strategic people here, the think tanks, the geopolitical analysts, they understand this issue very well, that for them to go alone and sort of contain China or challenge China is not possible without Indian support. They do have support of Japan and Australia and other countries, Korea, till India comes in a very big way. So I think India also needs to understand that it is a turning point in our relations, and this time we have to come forward very positively. We have to take leadership in the Quad. We have to make it more effective. When I had written out the first concept note on Quad before it started, my own thinking was that the Quad has to be a security instrument, a security entity. And that unfortunately got distracted into other areas. It has now to refocus on that. It has to, we don't want an alliance, but we want a partnership. I think we should go in for a very strong security partnership, because if America is threatened in the Indo-Pacific, India has to come forth and join forces with America and defend the free world. Similarly, if India is threatened by China on any front, America has to come to India's aid. So those sort of thinking, talking, documents, we are already very strong defense partners, but I think we need to take it now to the next level. We need not become NATO +1 or NATO +5 or NATO +6. I think it needs to just be US and India as very strong security partners, way beyond what we have achieved so far, but engaging in a dialogue where we don't just have 2+2, which we have been doing earlier, to move ahead.
Right. So now let me just update what is happening. Trump will be taking oath in 1.5 hours now. JD Vance will take oath right after 1 hour from now. And Purnima ji, my question to you is that how this term is going to be different from the previous term. Of course, Trump has played a major role even in international relations when it comes to meet North Korean dictator as well. But now, this time, what will be different? He has been talking about borders in USA, but what's different?
Trump has become more after his conviction towards like people like me who usually are not involved in politics, and that's how I came to politics. And I think I admire this gentleman. His conviction, his ability to stand in that particular moment has created a history. In general speaking, in any time something like this happens, we have what we have witnessed in the past is the leader actually tries to hide, and the entire discussions. Kamala Harris was actually not really attacked, but in her talk, somebody, Palestine supporter, disrupted, and she literally just both the leaders. Was extremely different, and he is furious. He is fierce, he is fearless. We know that from beginning itself. And his conviction towards making America great again, even though our GDP is extremely high, there's no comparison with any other country. The defense budget is obviously, if you add 3 countries, the 10 countries, top 10 countries, you still can't come to $900 billion defense budget.
Yes, but the local public, of course,
tell you something as a people knew that from the farm
people for H1B visa.
Absolutely,
what sort of people for H1B visa?
Absolutely,
what sort of fear
because
do they have?
it's Elon Musk and Trump.
What sort of fear
Because
do they
it's Elon Musk and Trump both have doubled down on H1. Elon Musk and Trump both have doubled down on H1B, and they have clearly said that they want merit-based immigration. They want merit-based immigration. They want smarter people enrolled and trashed. Merit-based immigration. They want smarter people enrolled and trashed through the corner. And we want smarter people enrolled and trashed through the corner. And we had. I didn't see President through the corner. And we had. I didn't see President Trump coming. Hopefully, I didn't see President Trump coming. Hopefully, I'm optimistic person in general. President Trump coming. Hopefully, I'm optimistic person in general. We all look forward to him. Optimistic person in general. We all look forward to him. We all look forward to him. Oath today is him. Oath today is term at this point of time. But oath today is term at this point of time. But in national security is term at this point of time. But in national security is in national security is aligned with wars and things like that. So aligned with wars and things like that. So here as a aligned with wars and things like that. So here as a her parents are here as a her parents understand the dynamics here. Her parents understand the dynamics here because become a Catholic or understand the dynamics here. Because become a Catholic or baptized and etc. Because become a Catholic or baptized and etc. But when it dies and etc. But when it comes to in US for the first time. But when it comes to in US for the first time in comes to in US for the first time in the entire history in the entire history is going to be quite positive. So I'm kind of I'm observing the situation. There I'm observing the situation. There are few. Secondly, obviously the Islamic entities and the Islamic entities and Oak Muslims and Islamic entities and Oak Muslims and recently Oak Muslims and recently the gender trans recently the gender transitions and where the alignment the gender transitions and where the alignment came from.
Yes.
Transitions and where the alignment came from.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Just a big news.
came from.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Just a big news that I want to share. They are.
yeah. So
Just a big news that I want to share. They are.
Coming to the
News that I want to share. They
finally
are.
coming to the hilt now.
And Biden
Coming to the hilt now.
and Biden
From what hilt now.
and Biden
From what Purnimaji restrictive. From what Purnimaji restrictive immigration policies. Purnimaji restrictive immigration policies,
or
immigration policies,
or great again, as he says, or great again, as he says. Now Indian tech is great again, as he says. Now Indian tech is into, and I personally, now Indian tech is into, and I personally think in the long run that and I personally think in the long run that in the Gulf we had a white collar. I think in the long run that in the Gulf we had a white collar. You're going to have techies. In the Gulf we had a white collar. You're going to have techies, but who are cheapers of the you're going to have techies, but who are cheapers of the American economy. Good future for but who are cheapers of the American economy. Good future for Indian techies. And then there's a American economy. Good future for Indian techies. And then there's a supply end here. Indian techies. And then there's a supply end here.
As Nagin had earlier,
Supply end here.
as Nagin had earlier mentioned by, as Nagin had earlier mentioned by,
Trump is on the way. JD Trump went to the
earlier mentioned by,
Trump is on the way. JD Trump went to the church and now again is on the way. JD Trump went to the church and now again, and they'll be church and now again, and they'll be
international affairs, international relations,
and they'll be
international affairs, international relations. Now, given international affairs, international relations, now given to counter, now given to counter, counter
the National Security Advice on India, foreign national security advice on India, foreign policy or going ahead India, foreign policy or going ahead currently poised, policy or going ahead currently poised, points which were mentioned earlier, currently poised, points which were mentioned earlier, as in the points which were mentioned earlier, as in the US per capita, as in the US per capita, US per capita, education in terms education in terms of an ethnic group, education in terms of an ethnic group. There are very terms of an ethnic group. There are very, whereas the same cannot be said about the other. There are very, whereas the same cannot be said about the other. Or the startup world, whereas the same cannot be said about the other. Or the startup world, the representation, the startup world, the representation of startups in the Silicon Valley, the representation of startups in the Silicon Valley is high. And every startups in the Silicon Valley is high. And every community is high. And every community to the quite disproportionate community to the quite disproportionate congressman here to the quite disproportionate congressman here values that you bring. Remember, question congressman here values that you bring. Remember clearly, internet also my parents clearly internet also my parents, and she is not trans, and she is not is very strong himself on many occasions. Is very strong himself on many occasions and make. So it's going to deploy it in this and make. So it's going to deploy it in this case.
Indeed, Mr. Kapoor, stay with us. Indeed, Mr. Kapoor, stay with us. Obviously, the all-important OT.
Actually,
obviously, the all-important OT.
Actually, I have said he needs to shots were taken against him at this point of time. Erica, all the best as well, because as well as internationally, he can. Erica, all the best as well, because as well as internationally, he can bring some peace. We have can bring some peace. We have seen, as we've spoken before.
There's going to be a lot of pressure on China. Again, art of cutting a good deal. Ultimately, that's going to be. And from an Indian perspective, if we are looking at 2047 to be a developed country, we have to engage all, and that would include very guardedly. Even China, if you have to have a Make in India program ready to go, 40% of the world's manufacturing is still over there. So while we keep our guard up, we have to engage everyone, and perhaps more strongly with the United States, but other players matter too.
Absolutely. Words of wisdom, I would say. Thank you so much, Atul Aneja there, an expert on foreign policy matters and also a former journalist. Shastriji is there with us in the studio. Thank you so much for taking time out before we welcome our another set of guests. Shastriji, obviously, this whole countdown to the inauguration of the 47th president is a loaded development, I would say. How do you see it? What do you see changing there?
Well, the biggest change tonight will be there will be more people watching Trump
Right.
assuming office than the Kumbh Mela. So it's a kind of break from the Kumbh Mela, which has otherwise been the solution of so many else.
Many Americans are here in Prayagraj, by the way.
Yes. So, but anyway, what's going to happen in Washington is not about asceticism or people renouncing anything. The billionaires all over the world will be on a roll.
Right.
They've never had a president like this. Okay, we can all say he's a felon, he's convicted of felony, first time ahead of government. But then there are so many other firsts also to Trump.
Right.
So I think that these 4 years are going to be interesting times. There will never be a dull moment because you never know what he will target, where, in which part of the world. It could be Greenland one day, it could be Taiwan the next day, it might be some place, one of those islands in the South Pacific or the mountain in Alaska. They are going to change. So it could be anything, but this will be very interesting times, and one has to perhaps track him more than any other US president has been tracked.
Absolutely, absolutely. And many critics, I would say, are still banking and hedging their bets on the fact that is Trump trying to step ahead of himself and maybe, the kind of history that he intends to make, whether it ends in an epic failure. That is also a risk that the administration could be running. Nonetheless, very soon we'll be joined by another set of panelists here. And as we have just mentioned, by 10 o'clock Indian Standard Time, which is another 30 minutes from now, J.D. Vance would be taking oath as the Vice President of United States. And at 10:30 would be the turn of President Donald Trump to take the oath for the second term, although non-consecutive terms he has served. For Donald Trump, do you see him as a maverick, Shastriji?
I think he struck a lot of fear in people.
Okay.
And he struck fear even in the present president of the United States, because I think it's bad form, bad tradition, and perhaps in a way a little disgraceful and unbecoming of Joe Biden's office to have pardoned his own son, who was accused of cutting corners in a business deal and things like that. But something more remarkable has happened in the few hours before Biden is to lay down office. He has pardoned Anthony Fauci and Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, because he feels that they will be persecuted by Trump. They have not yet been charged with anything, but Milley spoke to China when the riots were there in the capital, and he assured the Chinese President Xi Jinping that the situation is very stable and there will be no war against China, or the US will not attack China. So Trump had called him, either he said it's treason or he called him a traitor. And Fauci, of course, Trump was never comfortable with him.
Yeah, right from COVID days.
Yes.
Yeah.
And General Milley made it clear more than once that his loyalty was to the Constitution and not to Donald Trump as the president. And I remember one incident when he was walking with him to some point, and halfway he kind of turned back because he said, well, that was for a political purpose, so he didn't want to walk the rest of the way. So this is the other thing. It's heartening to hear India's own External Affairs Minister Jaishankar say that, well, there are many people who are nervous about Trump becoming president. India is not one of those countries. Now, I really hope that is true. And we will not know until things begin unraveling. But Indians have a lot of fear because of this H-1B visa. Of course, and both Musk and Trump have said that the first issue everybody will think of will be how it will affect their survival and their life. The first thing will be birthright citizenship, and then the H-1B visa.
Illegal immigration. Also.
Yes. So, in fact, there is already a joke doing the rounds that what Indians may ask for is not H-1B visa, But EB1 visa, this EB1 visa is supposed to be the visa. Einstein was given a visa when he fled from Germany.
Oh.
And so the argument is Indians are so brilliant. They are contributing so much to US science, technology,
Why not give
the
them?
internet, they are leaders of the internet and so on. So maybe they should all be given something called the Einstein visa. But I think we'll all stop. And the other interesting thing is just being reported that there are bitcoins started by both Trump as well as Melania. I think, again, this is the first by any head of government anywhere in the world. And he also spoken. Everybody feared what he would do to China but the first thing he does is he calls up Xi Jinping and speaks to him. And I don't know if she asked him, okay, you take Greenland, can I take Taiwan then? Anything can happen now.
Absolutely, absolutely. See, I mean, changing times, I wouldn't deny for a fact that things are changing. And when Donald Trump is here, you must and you should rather expect something which is unexpected. Let me very quickly rope in our new set of guests here. Thank you so much. John Zogby, American pollster and author, joins us from Washington, D.C. Burzine Wagmar, SOS South Asia Institute, University of London, would be joining us from London. Mithali Nikore, there you see her on the screen, economist and founder, Nikore Associates. And last but not the least, Sandeep Ghosh, political commentator and business leader, should be there very soon. Let me begin with the lady on the panel first. Mithali, this is not the first time that we are speaking to each other, but in a totally different and changed scenarios. Last time when we spoke to you, your firm, Nikore Associates, if I'm not wrong, also delves into dealing with the US market and has very closely followed the developments in United States. With Trump now in the seat of power, do you feel that things would be going upwards, or is there a slight chance of risk that people are associating it with?
I mean, I remember the day we spoke on the, at the time of the election and when the results were being discussed. So I do think that, there's a very interesting global dynamic that's going around, which we should recognize. What is very interesting is there's a re-engineering of supply chains for many commodities across the world that's, currently taking place with this new administration coming in. So when Trump announces and says, I would like to take control of Greenland, I mean, why is he saying that? He's not saying that for no reason. He's saying that because of the mineral wealth, the mining activity, and the fact that, the kind of minerals can actually help in manufacturing electronics, electric vehicles, and control a lot of the future manufacturing activity in which China has currently been dominant and has been controlling a lot of mines in Africa. So I do think, that these statements are not made without reason. And if you see, in Greenland, they're actually losing almost 40,000 liters of water per day as the ice melts. So there is a lot of land that is also becoming available. So, it's a very interesting dynamic that's playing out across the world as we see climate change intersect with global supply chains. So I do think that with the advent of the Trump administration, we'll start to see a lot of tech industry czars coming in and pointing out these futuristic trends to the president, and then the president being very quick to actually look at how American interests can be safeguarded, with these strategic announcements, acquisitions, if you will. So we really have to see how it plays out in the months and weeks ahead.
Right. Obviously, stay with us, Mithali. John, obviously, this history has been written. Obviously, Donald Trump coming back to power once again. How do you see this, and what's the general perception, if I may ask, especially for the day-to-day? How's Monday morning for most of the Americans there?
What an interesting set of questions. I can't help but contrast today with 8 years ago and the inauguration. 8 years ago, half of the country was just totally stunned, perhaps even more. The media, the mainstream media, was overtly hostile and ready to go to war. And Donald Trump was equally hostile and ready to go to war, declared a revolution in his populist revolution in his inaugural address, but no one really had any idea what he meant. And arguably, I'm not so sure that President Trump had much of an idea of what he meant. Now, contrast that with today. It is a clear victory, a stunning victory, a much different attitude on the part of the media. I would say not so much that they support him, but that they learned it's not very good to start out being overtly hostile to a fellow who actually came close anyway to winning a majority of votes, certainly a strong majority in the Electoral College. But very importantly, we have a much clearer sense about what Donald Trump's revolution means today. We know he's going to sign perhaps about 200 executive orders on immigration, on student loans, on drilling, oil and natural gas, on the southern border, and so much. We also see him surrounding himself physically, not just in the abstract, by Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos. Is that the warning that President Biden was giving to the American people about oligarchy? Or is this a recognition that, hey, look, these are the folks that control information, and I don't need ABC News and CBS News and the New York Times. Look at who I have here next to me, the folks who control much of the information in the world. That was a very long sentence, so I think I'll stop right there, but I have a lot more to say.
But, you have, John, actually stirred the hornet's nest here, I would say. And Brazine Wagmar is also there with us. How do you see it, Brazine? Is it too much of an ask or too much of a burden on Trump that he's surrounded by businessmen, by business honchos, and money does the talking? Is that enough for him?
Good afternoon from London. If I may just pick up the last strand from what John mentioned, I think Biden, as John would concur, was doing an Eisenhower year with his farewell address of the military-industrial complex, and how times have changed and much water has flowed under the bridge. We now have the tech oligarchs on the horizon, and yes, there is something to be said because the state has been largely untouched by the technological revolution, the digital revolution as such. It has become bloated. Regulations have sprouted at an exponential rate. Innovation has been stymied by regulatory mechanisms and the rest of it. So that may bring a blast of fresh air through foggy bottom, even as the temperatures dip to -12 as we see it today, come to think of it. That's number one. Insofar as Mr. Trump's in-tray goes, and where I would come in with Middle East and South Asian studies is, the three looming questions are Ukraine, China, and the Gulf. We can discuss all that at length subsequently, but could I just interject for a moment and come to Mr. Shastri's contention? I do not think Indians ought to be this sanguine, because I would draw your attention to the Times of India, masthead, page 1 of 11th November 2024, which mentioned about Indian illegals up in the US by 855%. According to the Times of India, undocumented applications seeking asylum were in 2021 4,330. They stand now at 41,330. That is 855% of undocumented aliens, and all of them coming primarily from Gujarat, which is a prosperous state by any social indicator and yardstick in Indian developmental terms. The question of them seeking asylum strains credulity. So I think New Delhi, in its with Trump 2.0, will have to look into this and simply cannot resist accepting back by the plane loads these Indians as a quid pro quo for the H-1B visas for talented Indians going out, legally speaking, and to accept back these individuals who are quite frankly, unwarranted and ought not to be there in the first place. So that is something to watch out for. So, and that I think New Delhi perforce will have to come to some arrangement on that aspect.
It is.
Coming to 855%, as I mentioned, the Times of India, 11th November 2024. Then there is the question of, let's talk about the Middle East. Mr. Trump does garner some credit for pushing Netanyahu to a Lebanese truce this November past, and also in some measure, along with the outgoing Biden administration, for the ceasefire that has just come into effect, and this is the second day. The point here is this. Through the campaign, if you recollect, and Mr. Trump tends to consider the personal as a political and tends to have gripes, as we know, he can be a thin-skinned man. He did mention that Obama got the Nobel Peace Prize while I did the Abraham Accords, and I went, it was a thankless task insofar as I am concerned. That has been gnawing at him. So that tells you where his thinking lies. And the Abraham Accords are a success by any stretch of the imagination and definition. Let's give credit to the man for that as such. The point is this. If he can bring about a rapprochement with Riyadh and bring Saudi Arabia on board, that will be of immense symbolic overtures with the Islamic world's primary state, I mean the spiritual center of Islam. True, the other OIC states may not necessarily follow suit just because MBS in Saudi Arabia would wish to seek a rapprochement. But the point is, it would make a massive impact in the region. And my contention is this, that would that were to happen in a suitable passage of time, because memories are still raw with what has happened in the last 15 months, we would look at a very strong set of allies in the Persian Gulf region, GCC allies as Bahrain, UAE, and Saudi Arabia. Kuwait is out of the picture because it can be terribly anti-Semitic and is, like Qatar, given to quoting Islamists. Oman is rather neutral and has amicable relations with the West and with Tehran, although it's a part of the GCC. But this coterie of states would in turn provide a massive bolster in the region to contain Iran. And it would strengthen their hand against Iran's nefarious ambitions in the region, and the fact that Iran is down and out, and considerably so, and rightly so, with its regional proxies and the rest of it, and that Khamenei is on the back foot. This would strengthen the states in the region who are more than willing to see an Iran contained, which has created havoc. Iran is the Pakistan of the region by running with the hare and hunting with the hounds. It talks about Islamic unity, but has at the same time subvented and supplied and sponsored havoc, murder and mayhem, and instability throughout the entire region, a denial of which is simply not on the cards. I'll stop here for now so that we can proceed to other contributors. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Brazin, your inputs there. And it gives me one quick question to Mr. Sandeep Ghosh, who has been there waiting patiently. And I'll come back to Mr. Shastriji also. Mr. Ghosh, obviously, what Brazin says, a lot is riding on President Trump's second presidency. And when it comes to solving the wars or putting, say, a Middle East in order, do you think that for business segment also, if Donald Trump at all chooses to mediate or try to put things in order as far as the Russia-Ukraine war is concerned, it is going to help not just the United States or India or Russia for that matter, but the whole world?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me over. The first thing, what one can predict about Trump is that he is totally unpredictable. So I don't think we should be hazarding too much of a guess as to what he is going to do. But what I do feel he is, unlike his first presidency, he is very clear in his second presidency, he would like to leave a mark. He would like to be remembered as the president. So although he may be, people call him a maverick, etc., but his moves will be very, very deliberate and calculated. He has a game plan in mind. and he will proceed according to that. So it might appear disruptive and conventional to people, but I think there will be a very clear path which he is going to tread. And his first concern, I think, will be the American economy. He understands that. And one reason why a lot of people have voted for him, even from the, what you might say, from the fringe or somewhere in who of the fringe of the view, are basically because of the economy. And in that, I think while he is doing the balancing act across the globe, India will have certain advantages, though we'll also have to yield some of these things, because you recall last time he had made such a big issue of Harley Davidson, the kind of duties imposed on that. So there could be some things, either to tokenism or otherwise. But I think India has, because I just end by saying Trump realizes it's no longer a bipolar world or even a tripolar sort of a situation. It's a multipolar world today, and there'll be spheres of influence. At each place, somebody will have to play a role. And India can play a role not only, as commonly believed, with to some extent balancing China, but India's role, even in the Middle East or the Islamic world, is becoming important. And I think he'll give weightage to that as well.
Right. There you see the live visuals from the Capitol, George W. Bush, the Clintons also there. Shastriji, how do you read these developments, these visuals coming in from Washington, D.C.?
Yes, I don't think there have been so many presidents.
The Chief Justice of the United States, the Honorable John G. Roberts Jr., and the Associate Justices of the Supreme Court of the United States.
And the dignitaries there.
Well, there was an occasion recently, though. That was at former President Jimmy Carter's funeral. You had all of them.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And the ceremonial gesture there and the protocol that you have from the Supreme Court of United States. The judges making an entrance. Right, these visuals will continue. Very quickly, I would like to, before I go to Mithali, John, if you could hear us now. Yes. Obviously, for the United States, a new dawn, I would say. But any word of advice, I would say, for Donald Trump from your side, from the general belief that the Americans would have, even if Trump is assuming power?
You know, I've noted that he has modulated his tone, which is very important because, historically, what presidents do is, at least in their first 100 days, they build a governing majority. But over the last 20 or 25 years, presidents have determined that they can really just work with their own base and their own political party, ignore the other party, and maneuver a majority to get some legislation passed. The thing I would alert Donald Trump to right now is he's going to issue executive orders. But executive orders are ephemeral. They can be turned right around by executive orders by a successor. If this president is looking for a legacy, and I agree that he does, he is looking for a legacy, he's got to ensure that it's legislation that's passed by Congress and supported by a majority of the American people. And so I would say keep that modulated presidential tone that you're showing the last few weeks and today. If you're going to roll up your sleeves, put on the boxing gloves, and go to war against half of the American people, then your legacy will be January 6th, 2021.
Okay, January 6th, 2021, clearly hinting at the scenes that unfolded at the Capitol. John, we'll come back to you just now. Mithali, obviously, for United States, definitely a day to celebrate. But when it comes to the overall sentiments that the world attaches with Donald Trump 2.0. As I mentioned earlier, is there some sense of inhibition, some sense of fear? Because as John mentions, the presidential orders would be passed for sure, but they are ephemeral. Do you think that Donald Trump knows this?
No, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it is well understood that there are trepidations, there are concerns for many groups. One big group around the world that has concerns is women, because at the end of the day, there are a number of debates around abortion within the US that have taken place. There is a chance that he will sign a presidential order today that prohibits any US funding to go across the world for financing any sort of healthcare where abortion is being performed. So, this kind of concern always remains amongst women. And there are also concerns on diversity, equity, and, inclusivity initiatives being rolled back in the US and around the world. So there are definitely concerns, but at the same time, there's also exuberance, as we can see from these images. A number of tech CEOs, from Google and Tesla, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, everyone is in attendance. And at the end of the day, this is the narrative which is expected to take precedence over the DEI and inclusivity narrative over the next 4 years. We are definitely more likely to see this.
Right. And they receive the who's who of the Americans' power corridor lined up there for the customary oath-taking ceremony of the new president, 47th president, Donald Trump. Brazine, I wanted to come to you and ask you very quickly on the fact that be it ending birthright citizenship or defining only two sexes, these could be some of the first executive orders renaming the Gulf of Mexico and ending the citizenship, birthright citizenship for the children of illegal immigrants. Do you think, on the whole, the American dream for many could come crashing down should this happen in the days to come?
Far from it, because Mr. Trump is speaking what common America, or what you'd call the Aam Aadmi, the commonsensical man and woman wants. 2 + 2 is 4, it's not 5. There are two genders, despite what the New York Municipal Forum in downtown New York, if you were to go, which tells you there are 35 genders that you can choose from. California is burning, at least parts of LA. Children cannot read and write, but they're being taught critical race theory and other such pernicious aspects, which makes out America to be a settler state, a colonial state, and this sense of guilt of whiteness and other exaggerated notions which are life-denying as such. So I look forward to a slew of legislation on this, on these pernicious aspects, including this so-called DEI mantra, which is just activism and quite frankly has brought in middle managerial jobs for people who are unqualified for any job, quite frankly, in life. That needs to be pointed out and put into perspective. I mean, the way, and I speak from the academy of things, that the way campuses have gone hard left, it is just deplorable. To say nothing of what we've seen in the last 15 months with the glorification of violence, with Hamas rapists and terrorists, where you have people who are actual murderers and rapists being glorified by so-called progressives and PhDs. So the pendulum has swung far to the left in the US, and these cultural wars do have an effect on us in England too, when we don't wish to have them imposed on us in the first place, not to mention elsewhere too. So there is something to be said about common people who do not want their children to be taught by transvestites. Do you see this in schools in Bombay, for instance? Do you find people dressed up in garish clothing and coming and talking to your children about sex and reproduction and other such aspects at the age of 5 and 6? This would be unthinkable anywhere in the world. But this is the kind of nonsense that goes on in hard left places like California, which quite frankly has gone to rack and ruin. And look no further than San Francisco, which was supposedly a beacon of progressivism. I mean, you have to simply, pull the plug at some point on it. And the Republicans are quite right to do so. And let me conclude this aspect, or rant you may call it, with one final point. During the electoral run-up in 2016, before Trump 1.0. Mr. Bernie Sanders, who is something of a socialist and very much on the left in the American political spectrum, at one particular rally was exasperated and blew his top. And what did he say, John, if you remember? America is fed up of hearing about your toilet problems. Nobody gives a hoot which lavatory you use as such. And this was to these so-called Gen Z types and these young wokerati. That is what Bernie Sanders is decidedly a man on the left said. America's fed up of your toilet problems and your so-called pronouns and whatever they are. People want